My name is Osamudia James. I'm a professor and Vice Dean of the University of Miami School of Law. My main area of research is about opportunity and inequality in education, primarily American public education, but also sometimes how it operates in private education. So I'm thinking specifically about how identity impacts access to education, how identity impacts opportunity in education, how identity impacts inequality in education, and I write primarily about race, although sometimes I write about class or other identities like gender or religion. And the idea is a pretty basic thesis, which is race or gender or class can limit or broaden opportunities in American public education, and I write about how that happens, how we might stop it from happening, how it might be happening in ways we don't realize, and what we have to do about it. For better or for worse, the area I write primarily about, which is equality or opportunity in public education, is evergreen. So we are still having conversations about what to do if schools are not integrated, what integration actually means, whether diversity and integration are the same thing. And that manifests in things like charter schools. Charter schools seem like a great opportunity for parents who are not being properly served in the public school to go someplace else, still in the public system, but maybe choose a school that's better for them and their family. And that can be true, but charter schools also tend to aggravate public school segregation. And so there are questions there. It's also the case that parents of color disproportionately choose charter schools because they're not happy in their neighborhood school, and there are questions there about why and how identity is impacting that. Those are some of the areas I write about. If you're following what's going on with Betsy DeVos or public school reform, funding issues, race to the top, ways that we incentivize innovation in public schools, but also ways in which that innovation can mask underlying inequalities, how well we integrate students with special needs or with learning disabilities into the classroom. All of those issues are always going on because we always have to educate our children, and understanding education law, or really just equality law, will help you understand those major issues better. Public education tells us something about our society. It tells us about what we think our children deserve. It tells us something about how people feel they should be treated when they interact with the state. If you're not a politician, often your only engagement with the state is through public education, through administrators, through the school board, and that's where our values as a community, they manifest themselves in public schools. Things about marriage, freedom of expression, integration, class inequality, identity questions, even things like gun legislation, all of that manifests in public education. And because children make us vulnerable, they're, for so many people, the most precious thing to you. People then feel those issues very deeply when it happens in the context of public education and their children, and even in private education. The basic first-year courses are important: torts, criminal procedure, con law, because those courses tell us stories about what the American narrative is and what it is a good life is and what it is that we think citizens owe each other and what we think the state owes its citizens. After you have that foundation, right, this is how American society works and this is how it's been reflected in the law, then you want to specialize in courses that speak to some of those big issues in education. Administrative law. Because school districts are essentially local education agencies, and there are rules for how they have to interact with the public, how they have to operate with the state, how money funnels through them, and so you want to understand how agencies operate, and that's administrative law. You also want to take con law too, the big issues of our day that we see manifesting in schools. The Second Amendment and gun control, freedom of expression and the First Amendment, integration and diversity, those are equal protection issues. So you have to take con law too, so you can understand what those issues are. And then also more specialized courses. If you can take a course on education law, and there are two aspects of that. One side of it are the constitutional issues, but the other side of it are the day-to-day workplace issues. So tenure for teachers, or the extent to which schools can drug test students, or whether they can search them in schools, or whether there are rules about what children may wear, or how they express their identity in the school building. Those are more, for lack of a better word, administrative issues, and you want to understand how that happens in the public school system as well. The paper I'm currently working on compares the marriage equality movement to the public school reform movement, looking specifically at integration or segregation in public education and thinking about what that became, that eventually it started off as integration and ultimately became diversity. And there are questions about whether that was the right endpoint for that movement. And I want to compare that movement to the same-sex marriage movement, which had a different path, and I'm trying to figure out why, how the stakeholders were different, how the stakeholders were the same, and what looking at one movement can tell us about the other movement. I think for the public school reform movement, when Black plaintiffs came to the Supreme Court, their initial ask was really about equal funding and not necessarily integration, but the movement shifted and became about integration. And there have been questions about what people of color have lost in the integration, because the integration didn't go two ways. It was minorities moving into predominantly white schools and maybe losing something in that shift, and it didn't go the other way. When you think about the marriage equality movement, there are also questions about the family structures that gay and lesbians created when they couldn't get married, and whether those alternate structures had value. And in the move to be able to be married like everyone else, do you lose something? Do you lose some sort of value or lose a sense of yourself? What you created to create family for yourself and your loved ones, did you lose that in the shift to want marriage like others? And so I think looking at the two movements, there's some interesting questions there. There's also some interesting intersections. When we think about the initial opposition to public school integration, it was concerns about miscegenation, concerns that Black kids and white kids would be getting married, getting together. So there was this overlap about marriage and family making and also race. And so the movement sort of intersected and then maybe diverged. And I'm curious about what we might discover when we look at the two movements side by side. Did I do it right? I used to do it wrong.